at the end of round 22. We're a week away from the finals, and winning and losing seems to be the most important thing. It means a little less to me. The number one story, I think, out of the weekend was Ben Cunnington and his return after 2 bouts of cancer for North Melbourne. You know, a universally respected player in Ben Cunnington and a person. To see the human side that exists underneath this game that, is a professional game and we all love, but just that story alone, I think was brilliant for the club. It was brilliant to see that Ben's up and about and has a chance to play the game that he loves. And I just thought it was really well handled by the North Melbourne Footy Club and Ben himself, so all credit.
Great story, and there's many of them throughout the course of this year, and it sits at the very pointy end, and it was great to see. I concur entirely.
Number 2 is a similar story. It's a maligned player in Jake Melksham who halfway through the year, his his skirmish with Stephen May and the words that were exchanged were seen as as nearly something that wasn't going to be overcome. But his performance on the weekend was first class. To come and whether the words were, we wouldn't have won the flag if you'd have played, whether it's anything like that, that sticks to a player. But he seems to be a really tough kid. His contested mark with a minute and a half to play gave Melbourne a chance. 15 disposals, 7 marks, 4 goals, 2. Playing as a defensive forward, looks after the intercept marker or the leading intercept marker of the opposition, and he's established himself. He's going to be in the run home. If Melbourne, wherever Melbourne go, he's going to be because he's played an important role recently.
Yeah, and 2 of the players, I thought that 2 of the more important ones that got him across the line were 2 players that didn't play in that grand final. Melksham, one of them, and Jaden Hunt was the other, who was just so important at various stages. It's interesting, isn't it? At the time, Mark Robinson wrote about Melbourne and the Melksham dust-up. He said that their season's falling apart. Make no mistake, trouble is sitting amongst this mob. That's a direct quote. In his article today, the couch psychologist mused that the Stephen May Melksham punch on at Pran restaurant would tear Melbourne apart. Well, that was you.
Is that what he's calling himself now? The couch psychologist?
Well, that was you that wrote it.
All right, mate. Well done. Nice little drive-by and a whack. I like it. Number 3, I've got Tom Lynch. 8 goals at the G yesterday at three-quarter time. He's kicked 55 for the year. This guy could well be the joker in the pack for Richmond going to the finals. Taking clunks and pack marks is pivotal in finals football and in big games. And if they'd been taken in the forward 50, which is where he's spending the majority of his time, he's not roaming far and wide like he did at the Suns when he was first cutting his teeth as a key forward. But he's still a very mobile player, still very agile, can get the ball on the ground. But you take 3 or 4 clunks in a forward 50 in a big game, in a tight game, final in the MCG, that's going to make a difference, and I think he's cherry ripe to have a big September.
Yeah, he was enormous yesterday, and his kicking is the other thing which tells you his confidence. Like, he flushed everything. He was kicking from outside 50. So the Tigers, they got Cumberland, who's a player, Rioli Jr., who we can talk about a little later, who's having his best moments at the moment. Jack Revolt was, of course, Bolton into the mix, Lynch, and then you got the guy in number 4 sitting back. Whew, if he gets back in that first week, look out.
Well, and there's some wait-and-see stories on that, isn't there? Because personnel, as much as injuries, becomes a big factor. All right, I've got a couple of moments to finish with. Number 4, Dane Rampy's goal in the first quarter was amazing, but his roll-back defensive effort to stop Brodie Myercheck kicking a goal in the middle of the last quarter was a significant moment. And when you get great games and great contests like that, and that's what we hope to see next week in round 23 with a couple of these games and then into finals, it is key moments that make the difference. And Rampy's effort
that was spine-tingling.
Well, we've seen Collingwood get that trait. They force the opposition to trade up, and you get the +1 over the top skinny side, and they end up getting over the back. And that's happened quite often with this aggressive ball use. But Rampy didn't give up, and that was a 60-metre rollback chase, and it was nearly done. But
crowd was going nuts.
Sydney just were able to best their direct opposition in Collingwood in enough of those big moments, and it's still a tight contest. You know, they controlled it for the most part, but it was still a tight contest, and it was brilliant to watch. But Dane Rampy, as one of the captains of the club, stood up. And the last one for me was right at the end of the Saturday night game. Melbourne were able to, as you said, Jaden Hunt took that ground ball and was able to kick it in long. But to get the ball in the first place, it was squared up by Jake Lever. It was a great heads-up play to put the ball in a dangerous position.
What happened there?
Well, Vossi will be looking at Carlton. Did they get enough numbers back behind the ball? Because when that ball went in, it was actually even numbers, and you can't have that when you're defending a less than 1 goal lead with seconds remaining. But Jake Lever was able to get his hand on the ball. You always think, okay, well, let's get directly to goal. Let's get as close to goal as we can. That's probably the instinct, but that is where the opposition numbers will be.
And you get trapped into a corner, into that dead pocket, and it stays there.
And we often see, well, that's why your best scoring opportunity sometimes is when you go back out and around, draw the defence up, and then maybe go in. But that kick was just a blind 90-degree perpendicular kick into the middle of the field. Motlop was the only Carlton player against 3 Melbourne players. Hunt swooped on it and was able to get it down for Kazai to finish off. But a great heads-up play by an experienced player. Would have been coached, but you still got to keep your head in the moment to trust and to execute when it matters.
I've got a couple to add. The tagger, I keep talking about it.
Yep.
You and I have agreed and disagreed at various stages. Windhager to Neil on Friday night worked. Lachie Neal's so important to that football club, and he has shown, I think, that he can be tagged. Clark to Nick Dacos was it? I'm being told this, but Clark to Nick Dacos worked yesterday.
There's definitely attention. Matheson
to Steele. Now Jack Steele and the Saints aren't really in the finals window. They've got a slim chance, but it has been lost a little bit. So Matheson this week, does he go to Oliver? Does he go to Petrarca in that? Taggers coming into finals are back in vogue.
It is, and it often happens, Gaz. We often see it when the game. So you back yourself and you back your system and you back your structure and you're nearly prepared to play and to develop your game style, without this tagging, this idea of hard tagging. But when the game's there to be won, and when you absolutely need to shut down an opposition player. When you get to the pointy end, you need to have it in your armoury, and most clubs do. Very few don't have that option to go to. Like Melbourne have Harms, and obviously Chris Fagan has used it with Matheson or with Berry in the past. And if you can get a C grader to do a job on an A grader, and it helps you win the game, well then that's something that you've got to consider.
And I think Nick Dacos will win the Rising Star, one of the most outstanding seasons. We've been so nice to him because we haven't put, and this is a credit to Nick. This is not a knock on Nick. We just let him we've let him go. It can't happen in big finals, and that's why Chris Fagan had this to say post game about Lachie Neale. What Fagan's saying is, just out of your book, your rule, not yours personally, but the coach's rule book. Put it on the agenda. Let someone else. He might get tagged again, but at least we've raised it. They don't want their main men tagged.
No, they
don't. It doesn't work for them.
No, they don't. And whether that comment was coming about me, I was tagged as a player, or whether you're saying it about
you were tagged from game one virtually.
Yes, there was a lot of tagging around, and it was an era that I would have loved to have played in this one where you shake hands at the start. Although I played there for a little while, but no, the tagging was in vogue in the middle of my career, but. It definitely has an impact, and we see it when it does, and we think that that's the panacea, but it needs to be effective. You need to have someone who has the attributes to be able to tag firstly, and then secondly, you need to know that it's actually going to work. We had times when we chose not to tag because we didn't think it was going to be effective.
Yeah.
Because we didn't think we had the player who could do it to the capacity that would actually make it worthwhile.
And this is being pointed out, and I spoke about this yesterday a lot. McGuinness went to Shea Bolton yesterday, and it worked. So and this is a great thing for Richmond. They still won by 70, 60 points, and Shea Bolton had had moments, but a negligible impact compared to the sort of form that he's been in. So whoever plays Richmond in game one of the finals will look at that and go, okay, can we go to him?
So we're seeing the next wave of Cameron Lings, of Anthony Stevens. Duncan Kellaway was probably a little bit more of a lockdown. Tony Free did it for a little while. Todd Viney, tagged and won the ball himself. Are we seeing the next evolution of tagging players who actually are ball getters as well?
I think I hope. Well, I would say I hope so.
Windhager's his performance was
he got more footy than
he
Neil.
had 21 touches and Neil had 16.
Yeah. So why it's one that has continually surprised people that it hasn't been in vogue when you can see the impact that it has on the opposition team. Akos still had 20 and kicked a goal. He did. Yeah, he worked through it, but he didn't have the impact. And anyone that knows their footy knows he didn't have the impact that he's been having.
He actually, I think the way Craig McRae uses him has been very effective though. He's played half-back, he can play high half forward, and he's played in the midfield. And he was really quick. When he started behind the ball, he was really quick to move him into the midfield and forward of the ball when it looked like he was going to get sat on.
Yep.
Because as a half-back, if you're getting sat on, it's nearly impossible because you're used to being an extra number. And you're not getting your touches through contested ball. So you're a sitting duck to be tagged.
Yeah.
So to move him straight out of that was effective.
Yep.
And Nick still had an impact. The texter was correct. But there was a shift that needed to take place in the opposition coach's box because of a tactic here, and that's where you find out where the gaps are.
Yeah, and these are the arguments, right? Hawthorn's tag on Bolton work, question mark, they lost by 10 goals. Yeah, no, that's right, because they're not as good a side as Richmond. But Shea Bolton's impact on the game was particularly diminished by the McGuinness tag.
One thing that I would say about that is when you are tagged in a dominant team performance, your team is dominant and you're getting sat on, often the ball your teammate, the ball carrier, has 2 or 3 options to go to. You're not going to go to the guy who is actually sat on. So sometimes your team can be so dominant that it's easier to be tagged out of a game because there's plenty of other options for a ball carrier. So that I didn't see a lot of that go. I saw some of it, didn't see a lot of it, but I don't know. McGuinness has taken scouts with him.
No, he was fantastic. I watched it all closely.
So I don't want to take credit away from him.
Single-minded and stuck to it, and he had a win. What do you make of Jason Horne-Francis being dropped? I haven't spoken to you since then. He went back and, from all reports, accepted it. Had 20 touches in the first half. Ended up with 29 for the game, and Patch Adams was talking about standards, and Brent Harvey talked about standards, and he apparently missed an ice bath or something along those lines. With the second last game of the season, would you have done the same thing? Hard to know.
No, it is hard to know. But if what we like to do is we boil it down to like one issue or one event. What I would suggest is that this is a young man who has still got a lot of development, both on and off the field. And this club and this coaching group, and have had Noble first and now Adams and now a leadership group that are trying to help him become a better player and a better product for the club. Are making calls based on a concern of a player leaving, and then that means that they sweep issues under the carpet and miss development opportunities. Well, then that club isn't worth a pinch of salt. Or the coaches that are making, or the leadership that are making the decision. So I think you need to get rid of the exterior, get rid of the potential fallout, and just say, right, how are we going to help this young man or this person become the best version of themselves? And you've got to make the decisions in the moment that you think are based on the evidence that you have, which is a whole lot more than anyone outside the club has.
I didn't mind it. I thought that's what Lee Adams should be doing in the interim as an interim coach, is demand high
standards. It's what any coach should do.
Yeah. Well, I don't reckon coaches would every time. I don't think, in my opinion.
But when you're in there...
When you're the interim, you make the call because you know you're not going to get the job anyway.
So you think that an interim coach is more ruthless and has a more short-term view, this is a longer-term view.
Yeah.
So they're actually making decisions for something that they might not actually be there for in the long term.
I think Patch Adams has already said that if the best thing for the footy club is he's not there, then good.
And we're assuming that he made the decision too.
Yeah.
I think a good leader, a good senior coach would therefore involve the rest of his staff, some of his staff, and definitely the leadership in the playing group.
Probably did
to decide how to handle players as they go along.
Sam Edmund not far away. There's a bit spiralling. There's a bit I'll just say swirling. Now he's the best in the business, Sammy. So he will do it responsibly, but he'll be here with all the news. This is a So Paddy McCartan, did you see the rush behind that ended up in the goal for Paddy McCartan?
I did.
Right. So I don't know the answer to this. So he gets paid a mark because the kick off the ground, wasn't it? And then Paddy marks it on the goal, near enough to the goal line, goes back, plays on, umpire calls play on. He comes under pressure from whoever it is, and then he walks across the line. I don't know the answer to this, so you might be able to help me. Isn't it if you're under pressure, you're allowed to walk it across the line? Or was he deemed to have had the opportunity to get rid of it and didn't?
I think the second part is where the grey area is. That he had a no pressure opportunity, but then gave that up.
But you don't have to kick it straight away.
No, I think well once it's called play on, well then that's done.
Yeah.
That's done. So now you've got to make the decision based on what's actually happening now. And I don't know. It'd be interesting to see whether the umpires, when he goes through, whether that's an unwarranted.
Let's see if we can get maybe an answer on that, boys, from the umpires department. That's just a technicality that we might like to tick off. But I was interested. I didn't know the answer. I thought, oh, well, maybe they said that he had plenty of opportunity without the pressure, therefore. But when they call play on, you can stand there as long as you want.
It didn't quite gel with me. I thought that was a strange decision.
We just quickly on the Adelaide Crows. So they've won 8 games now, one more than last year. So is it as simple as, or is it your eye telling you they're getting better?
Who's that?
The Crows.
The Crows. I think their pressure performance has been high. Taylor Walker's had a great season. We've got some young players that are coming through. I mean, Rochelle was there early and looked like he was going to be the young kid that was going to come through. But then they've had Saligo, McHenry's doing really well. Berry's gone into the middle with Laird, and they've become tackling machines.
Fogarty's better.
Fogarty's jumped out of the ground and having a crack.
Yep.
I think that Matty Nix and his crew have done a really good job. They've played as consistent a footy for those teams in the second half, in the bottom half of the ladder. They've probably played as consistent a footy as anyone.
Well, you compare
and when
them
they've lost,
to
they've
Essendon.
lost closely. Yeah, they haven't been smacked.
No. So they've never been in finals contention, nor have the Bombers, but they've not really dropped their standards. And this is a very, very young side. So that's a pretty stark contrast, I think.
Well, coaching announcements not too far away at 2 clubs, GWS and North Melbourne, Gary. And renewed pressure, I think it's fair to say, on a third club to make its own change, and that being Essendon. There's a lot of anger around the Bombers at the moment. So if the patience is wearing thin on where they stood, for many connected to that club, that level of patience has evaporated. So plenty of rumblings last night. We know there will be change brought on by the Football Department review. They're second in 3 years. That was announced in May by the President, Paul Brasher. How far those changes extend is the question some connected to the club were asking, pondering last night. So just have a listen to Ben Rutten as well. This was him last night. He was asked specifically after the loss to Port Adelaide whether his belief was wavering in the direction the club was headed in. They're a powerful club. So when things are going well, they're going very well. When things are going like they are at the moment, there's always going to be rumblings. They're a big coterie club as well with outspoken partners and supporters and members. So at the moment, Gary, there's a lot of anger around the club. They're a watch for today and for this week, I think it's fair to say. Without putting the cart before the horse, I think they are a watching brief at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting day, but we'll move on.
Do you reckon there's anything that the coach can say in that circumstance that actually has you go, yeah, that sounds like he's got it all under control? Because, I mean, you're coming from a position of weakness, aren't you? When a performance as poor as that off a season as poor as this, there's nowhere to go, is
and
there?
you keep saying you can't tolerate it. And you won't tolerate it, but the performances keep coming. It puts you under more pressure.
Yeah.
At North Melbourne, it'll be announced very soon, maybe this week even, that major sponsor Mazda has signed on again. So that's a significant announcement, and it's been widely speculated that will act as the trigger for a range of off-field movement, potentially a coaching announcement and a CEO announcement as well. So just with the CEO, record membership, no debt, new facility, Mazda back on board, commercially been a massive success, but there's a concern there that they won't be able to attract the football staff they need unless there's a CEO change and a more football-orientated CEO is brought in. So they're a watch as well, North Melbourne, of course.
Is that a proviso of the, if it's Clarkson, for instance, that he would want a different CEO? Is that where we're heading?
I couldn't say as absolute fact that that's come back to North Melbourne in terms of feedback, but there's an awareness at North Melbourne that they won't be able to recruit, and not just the senior coach, but that top-level football IQ unless there's other changes made to their current setup at Arden Street.
How does that come about? Because obviously if Clarkson's coming in as coach, he's not going to be looking at, is he going to be looking at the admin, or has he looked at the admin?
I think it's part of the consideration. Yep, for sure.
And Jeff Walsh wouldn't have looked at that, though. He's looking at, like, director of footy down.
No, I think there's feedback. I think there's feedback in that part of the club as well from the Jeff Walsh review, which we're still waiting on a summary of findings, which, of course, you can understand can't be put out until those staff members are informed, which they hadn't been as of late last week, and also a new coach is appointed, which all makes sense. GWS, they've been determined to run a process. So as of Saturday, they had not made any offer to Alistair Clarkson. So it's hard for him to accept a job at GWS that he hasn't been offered.
They might have offered it to someone else.
Well, Adam Muse, Adam Kingsley, Mark McVeigh, all interviewed along with Clarkson. So while North obviously go chips in, they make that offer to Alistair Clarkson. He's been North Melbourne's one and only option at this stage. The Giants have been stepping through it a bit differently. Now, from what I've heard, I think Adam Muse in the absolute box seat to take over there. Now, watch this space. But I think Adam Muse, if you were to frame a market right now, you'd have him at the top of the tree.
Is it conceivable that Adam Muse or whomever has won that job in his own right?
That's what some are saying at the moment, Gary, but I could not state that as fact at the moment.
So the consensus
that has actually taken
that, North Melbourne are all in on Clarko,
Yep.
Therefore, but the Giants are saying, no, he is one of whoever, and if it's emerged that he's presented and Clarkson's a president, and then he wins out in his own right.
Well, what we know of coaching is that one coach is not necessarily a fit for all, and we all think that Alistair Clarkson is going to be the best fit for any club because of his record and because of his career to date. But that's not necessarily the case. I think every club needs to work out exactly what its setup is, what it's looking for, what personality it wants to have, and that will determine the individual that it needs to bring in. So I think that shouldn't be read that Alistair Clarkson is the best fit for every
but it's still,
opportunity.
That's true, Nathan, that is true. But it would be a big story if they've gone through a considered process and elected to go for a first-year coach over a full-time.
Absolutely. It would be a big story.
And these things are so tightly held. We piece together things from what we're told and what we hear along the way. So we'll wait and see. I think it's going to come to a head at both those clubs shortly. Speaking of things coming to a head, this Thursday there's a CEO's conference for the AFL. A lot to get through, a lot on the agenda. One thing the clubs believe will be discussed, Gary, is an increase to the salary cap. So we talk a lot about the soft cap, marginal increase next year and beyond. But the TPP at each club at the moment is set. It's back to the top, $13.5 million this year, excluding those additional services agreements. So the clubs I spoke to say they've been given an indication that the cap is about to rise somewhere in the vicinity of 5%. So that takes it up another 650,000. So effectively another good player is able to be paid. So it all hinges on the broadcast rights deal, of course, which hasn't even been confirmed, and the revenue share model as well attached to that going forward as part of the new collective bargaining agreement. But as far as the clubs are concerned, the ones I spoke to, they think they're going to get a little bump up when it comes to the salary cap next year. So we'll watch this space as well.
I'm just watching the final hole of the FedEx St Jude Championship. Zalatoris has sunk a 10-foot putt for par, so he's at 15 under. Straka's got a hole to play. He's also at 15 under, so he's in a tie for the win right now with Straka with one hole to play. Sorry, Phil.
That was very nice by Coxie. I don't know if you heard that. Beautiful.
Yeah, a little ball drop.
Yeah, that was very nice. Understated. We need to talk about Zane Cordy. So Groundhog Day with the bump, about to go on trial again. We've got a puzzling situation involving Zane Cordy, who's been sent straight to the tribunal for a shepherd on Tanner Bruin at GWS, left the youngster concussed. Cordy was blocking within the permitted 5 metres for teammate Ed Richards, but there's some nasty whiplash for Tanner Bruin at play there, and his head hits the ground hard and he's concussed. I'm just not sure why it hasn't been graded by Michael Christian. I mean, 22 charges laid from the Saturday games. Why wasn't this one graded?
Gun shy.
Or you clear him right then and there. Well, almost like it's in the too hard basket. Something's gone on behind the scenes there that has seen him send this directly to tribunal ungraded.
Do you think the AFL have suggested that is the best way to go?
I don't know, Gary.
Nah.
I don't know.
Looking at it, what do you think it? How would you grade it?
I've got some sympathy for Zane Cordy because he's trying to block for a teammate.
Yep.
And he's got the shoulder tucked in.
Yep.
And it's within the 5 metres.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, he's bumped. He's caused harm to another player.
But not classified as high contact. It can't be classified as high contact.
But are you not culpable if you choose to bump and the other player gets concussed, whether it be by whiplash or your head slams the ground or whatever it is? So let the player argue the defence. Let the dogs argue the defence. And if they get off, they get off. But at least put it to them. This hot potato just passing it down the line.
As I said yesterday, it's just a farce, the whole thing.
If you're going to take the job that Chris O's taken, you need to sort of make a decision on that. But at the same time, I can understand how you want to hand that on. Just because I'd nearly been on go, I don't know how I can possibly give this guy a week for executing a perfect bump within reason. A contact should have been expected, but because of something that's happened after the contact,
So hang on.
he's supposed to get a week.
So he might get a week for not hitting the head, whereas Cripps gets no weeks for hitting the head. Tell me the system's in good shape.
And yeah, so I can understand him handing it on, but at the same time, if you're in the role, it's confused. If he's confused or if he's asking for clarity from the tribunal, well then maybe.
So these decisions get ticked off by the AFL. We know that. So we wonder what the conversation was like yesterday behind closed doors with it. Was it one where, who knows, maybe Michael Christian's decided he should get off. Now AFL said, no, we can't have something like that get off, or vice versa. And he's just said, well, stuff it, I'll send it to the
So you reckon there's a negotiation before these things come down?
Well, yeah, there is sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. They're discussed. They're discussed internally, no doubt, with the AFL. Antonio Conte, Thomas Tuchel, I know you spoke about it earlier, guys. The Spurs and Chelsea managers clashed at the end of a dramatic 2-2 draw in the Premier League at Stamford Bridge. Now, watch the highlights. This have been brewing for the 90 minutes because they kept celebrating their team's goals in front of each other. They would run across in front of each other and celebrate.
Up your nose?
It was, real up yours after every goal. So it had been brewing. And at the handshake, Conte didn't look Tuchel in the eye. It was a real storm past. And as he stormed past, Tuchel didn't let go of his hand. And Conte
he didn't look at him.
Was spun around. He said, look me in the eye, mate. Look me in the eye. So both red-carded, both facing one-match touchline bans. But great theatre in the Premier League overnight, the touchline there.
Absolutely magnificent. Will Zalatoris is in the clubhouse at 15 under. Sepp Straker, he's at 15 under and about 15 feet from the hole for birdie to win. The Aussies, the best of the Aussies. Cam Smith is finished in a tie for sixth. Adam Scott's a tie for sixth as well. Cam Davis a tie for 14th. Sorry, Fieldy, you still going?
No, just watch on the injuries as well. We could run through the scenarios all day. That Carlton-Collingwood game's so pivotal. It's going to take place without Matthew Kennedy, done for the season now. Scans confirming a Liz Frank injury after that fractured jaw. Adam Chera, no certainty. He was laid out with adductor soreness. And then Collingwood have got their own issues. Jack Ginnivan, highly unlikely with that hamstring tightness that saw him subbed. Taylor Adams, actually, interesting tweet from him, watching from home with his own groin injury on the couch, tweeted, imagine booing an injured player. Grubs. He loves a tweet, doesn't he, Tate? And then Jordan De Goey laid out with a sore hip flexor, so unknown at this point whether he'll be right to face the Blues. Top four at stake. They play the long game. Slippery slope now. If you fall through the injury trapdoor now, you're done. So he's probably more unlikely than likely. So both teams with some injury issues.